you carry a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members. Unlimited defense budgets, unmatched legal expertise. Carry the same level of support police officers have. Carry CCW Safe, the highest caliber.
Hey, welcome, Patriots. Wow, already started off to a great start. Fellow believers, we are on another episode of Survival Dispatch News, where we stand firm in truth, faith, and freedom. You're the heartbeat of this show, hardworking Americans who cherish God-given rights and protect your families and live in principles and of self-reliance and traditional values. We're here to equip you with knowledge and help you navigate the world that is increasingly hostile to our way of life. I am your host, John Wheaton, also of the Righteous Savages, and we are simulcasting. All of my episodes get simulcast to our podcast channel, Righteous Savages Podcast. If you guys go over to YouTube and check that out, we're also putting up some other podcasts outside of just the normal streams that you guys get. And today I am joined by my partner in crime, my fellow anti-communist, Mr. S2. How are you today, brother?
Doing just fine, John.
Yep.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, and I'd like to apologize really quickly for Sunday night. Had some family stuff that came up and had to kind of cancel that episode at the last minute. You guys, I'm sure all of you with families out there understand how hectic holidays can get. So that's kind of why that got canceled. But we're here tonight. We're not going to stop. And today is the episode that was promised to you guys about the Steel Communion, Stalin, the NKVD, and the machinery of fear and death. So we're exposing the brutal reality of Stalin's regime, his war on truth, family, and liberty. No fluff, just what you need to know and understand to be able to navigate what communists are trying to do in the modern age. We look at history as a prism for what the future may hold if we do not combat this. As we go through this series, I think you guys are it's going to become very, very apparent that communism is not dead. It's actually probably not even dormant. It's very active. And today, it's been very active through history since its inception. And it is an anti-God, anti-Christian, and anti-Western civilization ideology that is bent on killing, destroying, and subjugating all that stand in its path. So we have to educate ourselves and understand what it takes to combat this. And it takes active engagement, not very, very passive softness that we see so much in today's society. Real quick, I do have an announcement. Next week, myself and Chris are headed down to WAFT, and a couple of other people are going to be joining us down there. I know James from Pilgrim Ammo is going to be down there, and we're going to be shooting some content and doing some training to do reviews on some suppressors and some LPVOs that were graciously provided to us by Primary Arms. And we'll be doing some very, very interesting content for you guys that's coming out very soon. So keep an eye out for that. Next Tuesday, instead of my normal episode, we will be actually doing a roundtable discussion about the training that we did at WAFT and how you guys can be better prepared, and also talking about some of the things that we used in our training. All right. So let's kick this off with some news stories. There's some important news stories that will help you guys if you value liberty, faith, and the right to defend what's ours. Then these are ripped from the headlines, filtered through the lens of skepticism towards the centralized power and committed to individual freedom. So first up, there's a new push for red flag laws that is coming in your coming very soon to a state near you. So go and give me just 1 second. Let me get this prepped up. So this is from the NRA and America's First Freedom. This is extreme risk of red flag laws and confiscation orders. This is from late April of this year. This is talking through several of the things that are going on. So these laws allow authorities to seize firearms based on vague claims of dangerousness. This could be something as simple as you guys walking to your car to go to the gun range, and you may have a rifle bag, which are very, very obviously rifle bags. There's very few bags that people carry that are that shape. And or you could, like, I have a gun belt that I'll throw over my shoulder when I'm going out to my truck. Now, I trust all of my neighbors. They're all very, very conservative people. So I don't really typically worry about this, but maybe you have the Karen that's the liberal purple-haired lesbian lizard person that wants to completely and totally disarm you, and they call the authorities and they confiscate your guns because of quote-unquote dangerousness. For gun owners, this is a direct threat to the Second Amendment, the ATF's recent regulatory overreach. Thankfully, that is being reversed by the new administration, but it already has us on its edge. And we're currently actually being sabotaged by our own party on the trying to remove suppressors and short-barreled rifles from the NFA. They are trying to compromise instead of standing firm, like they say, like they give lip service to. But this is something very, very important to consider if you live in a blue state like myself. I know that there is nothing that the liberals and the fat man in Chicago would want to do more than to seize our weapons, because almost 99% of people did not register their weapons when the Protect Illinois Communities Act was enacted. So we don't have very many people that are adhering to these laws. So what's the next step? They want to confiscate. S2, I'm going to give you a chance to talk about this, because this is honestly right in the wheelhouse of communism. This is a standard operating procedure for communism, so it fits right in with our main topic. But I'll give you the floor, sir.
Well, as we progress through this and we start talking about communism, we have to understand something right now from the get-go, is that socialism and communism are really what we're looking at here. You have the communists in the country and you have the socialists in the country. They're both related, and both terms are used interchangeably by the left, but they have very distinct economic and political ideologies. So that's something important to note here. And where we talk about totalitarian control, we're more talking about communism rather than socialism. So we are right now in what I would term as a socialism light environment. They're trying to quietly do all of this, but it does pose a danger. But the problem they're going to have is, as long as there are chunks of metal lying around and somebody knows how to use a machine shop and there's a hardware store, there's always going to be guns. So they can try to take things away from people, but they can't get them all.
Yeah, exactly. And really, and you can speak to this too, with the advent of 3D printing and metal 3D printing, this is something that is it's not going to be something that they can control very easily. And they realize that, but that's why they're trying to push on the stuff that they can get, the low-hanging fruit they can get. And real quick, I do have one other announcement to make. We have been back and forth with Rumble, and unfortunately, we have not been able to resolve. I know that Chris was able to get Rumble up and running on the last episode, and I think maybe the last couple of episodes. Here is the problem. I went to set it up tonight for the stream, and we got the same issue that we have had the last several days. So effective immediately until we can actually get this resolved to where it is a functioning thing on a daily basis. We're going to X the Rumble stream. So everybody that's normally on Rumble, unfortunately, you'll have to go to our Substack or our YouTube channels, either the Righteous Savages podcast YouTube channel or the Survival Dispatch or Survival Dispatch News YouTube channels to get this stream. I apologize for that, but we just can't make Rumble connect right now. But back to the news, and this is something that's very interesting as well. In Texas, Texas unveils classical education curricula based on Texas and American exceptionalism. Next, there is a cultural battle heating up in over school curricula. The parents across the country are pushing back against what they see as indoctrination in the classroom. 100%. I completely agree with this. Think critical race theory, gender ideology, and other items that we definitely do not agree with. Godlessness is rampant in our schools, and this is something we have to fight. But in Texas, a school board it just voted to prioritize classical education rooted in Western civilization and biblical values. I know several Western states, including Oklahoma. Oklahoma has already kind of paved the way here, trying to push this in their schools. Their state level education. Their education figure has basically the head of the education system in Oklahoma has basically pushed this. I think it was last year, even during the Biden administration, they were pushing this. But this is a win for families who believe parents, not bureaucrats, should shape their kids' worldview. And our take, keep showing up at school board meetings. Your voice matters in preserving the moral foundation of the next generation. So this is on the Epic Times, and this is a great article talking about what the plans are. They have 3,000 lessons so far and full-on textbooks. Michael Morath, who is the Texas Education Commissioner, is the one heading this up. So classics such as C.S. Lewis, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, Martin Luther King's Letter from Birmingham Jail, and the developing reading skills while the vocabulary accompany reading passages concerning the variety of topics, including Greek and Roman mythology, the Crusades, Magna Carta, and American Revolution, the Civil War, and the Holocaust. There will be a strong emphasis on phonics, huge, and teaching students how to read. I don't know if you guys know the test scores, but when you look at them across the country, it is abysmal. Our reading, writing, arithmetic, math scores, we are supposed to be the leader of the world, and we are like 37th or 38th in all of those things. S2, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, I'll add for your state, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
They recently ran a poll in your state where they said that kids in second grade could not even read at grade level. 0%.
Yep. There
0%.
There are 38 schools, most of them in the Chicagoland area, prominent, massive schools where not a single student, high school, grade school, elementary, can read at their current level, and many can't read at all. That's the education. Yep. And we spend more money on education than just about any other country in the world. But it's the wokeness and the ideology that's coming out that is breaking the system. We didn't have this problem a century ago. In fact, we were the leaders in education, and all of a sudden we're terrible, and it's because the focus has been taken away from teaching kids to think to teaching them what to think. You agree with that?
It's teaching them more about victimhood than anything else, which is what critical race theory is. It basically states that critical race theory basically states that oppression is everywhere, and in order to fight that, you have to be a victim. And along with the whole gender ideology thing, that's also a socialist construct or communist construct. Once again, used interchangeably between the two, because that is a destabilizing force, destabilizing goal that they intend to meet. That is one of their four stated goals, is to destabilize, and using gender ideology is a way of doing that.
Absolutely. That is 100% true. So in any case, that is really the headline news for today that we are going to bring to you. And so moving on, these stories hit home because it's defending our rights and our kids and our country. Let us know if you're seeing in your communities and on our Substack at survivaldispatchnews.substack.com. Check us out there. You guys can sign up as a paid member if you enjoy this content that we push out on a daily basis. A lot of work goes into this, and I'll tell you what. I spent some time with Chris this last Thursday and Friday in Georgia, and you guys probably saw us trying to get the streams to work from a very remote location. I can tell you, Chris works tirelessly at everything. Dude is an inspiration, and really can't say enough about his hard work that he puts into these streams and into all of the content that we bring to you guys. Dude is just I don't know how he keeps going at that rate. I know I came back and was wore out all weekend. So anyways, on to the main topic. If you guys, well, actually, let me finish this up real quick. If you guys want to sign up for the Substack, go over to the Substack address that I just gave you, or just go to Substack and search Survival Dispatch. You'll find us, and you guys can sign up for $9.99 a month or $95 for the year. That saves you guys about 2.5 months worth, and that gets you all of the behind the scenes content, gets you all of the sit reps that go out. It gets you guys exclusive content that we only give to our guardians, and you also get our emags as well as our survival guide that'll help you guys in any kind of SHTF type of situation. Now on to the main topic. The Steel Communion, Stalin, the NKVD, and the machinery of fear. And I will also add death in there, because this is where the death, the body count, and everything starts to skyrocket in a massive way. So as conservatives, we know the dangers of unchecked power. We have fought against this most of our lives in most cases. Stalin's Soviet Union is a chilling case study on what happens when a regime turns it against its own people, crushing dissent, faith, and freedom. Understanding this history isn't just academic. It's a warning for today. And I said that earlier. This is important for us to know. We have to study history to know what the future may bring if we do not stay on the wall. When governments prioritize control over liberty, no one is safe. This matters to us because we are committed to protecting our families, our communities, and our God-given rights from a system that seeks to dominate it, a tyrannical system. We've seen it throughout history. It is just as prevalent today because it is a symptom of human nature, of sinful nature, and that's born into men. So let's move forward. Last episode, we talked about Vladimir Lenin and the the Russian Revolution, and how this was the precursor that laid the groundwork for Stalin. And Stalin came into power and instituted what is known as the Great Purge. And this was in 1937, 1938, so pre-World War II. And this is the Great Terror. It's an article from history.com talking about the Great Terror. The Soviet leader Vladimir Lenin, head of the Bolshevik Party, dies in 1924. Stalin had to fight his way to political succession, but ultimately declared himself dictator in 1929. Stalin was always a power-hungry person who wanted the power and the leadership of the Soviet Union. So Stalin's rise to power, some members of the former Bolshevik Party came to question his authority. By the mid-1930s, Stalin believed everyone with ties to the Bolsheviks or Lenin's government was a threat to his leadership and needed to go. The exact motives of the Great Terror was endlessly debated among historians. Some claim the actions of Stalin were prompted by his desire to maintain authority as a dictator. Others see it as his way to preserve and unify the Soviet Communist Party. And the rise of the Nazi Party power in Germany and militarists in Japan also posed a great danger to the Soviet Union. Many experts believe that the threats further encouraged Stalin to carry out his purge in an effort to unite and strengthen his country. Okay, so here we get into this. S2, this was the breaking point, or the beginning of what we see as this tyrannical movement. So I'm going to give you a chance to speak of Stalin's, the gospel of terror, his great terror movement, and what kind of inspired that in your mind.
It's kind of strange because you have two different camps of communism. You have the Leninist Marxist version, and then you have the Stalinist version.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime someone says that communism hasn't been tried, doesn't take into consideration the difference between the Leninists, Marxist, and the Stalinist. The Leninists and the Marxists are more closely aligned, and the Stalinists are a completely separate group. So there's two separate camps in that respect. The Leninist Marxist visions of communism see a global version of communism being spread. And that's basically where you have more of a socialist environment, but then you also have our modern day leftist socialist revolutionaries out there that want to take, and they're basically taking all of the most vicious parts of Stalinism and mixing them in with the Leninism, where they don't want, they're attacking capitalism and they're attacking private property. So the Leninists and the Marxists believe that Stalin didn't go far enough and only localized communism within Russia. Mm-hmm. So because that's why I said, when somebody says communism hasn't been tried, it's because they typically think of Stalin. And Stalin really did kind of keep that within Russia. He didn't try to go global with it because he couldn't. So the only thing that he could do was to gain power, which is also one of the communist goals, is to gain as much power possible and keep that power.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the key points that really kicked this off, and you'll find this. You'll find this as we start to get into the kind of like the heavy hitters of communism, and that's Stalin, Mao, and then all of the minors like Pol Pot and can't think of his name, Justin Trudeau's dad, in Cuba. But all of these guys are they're very, very suspicious. They're always thinking that somebody is about to take them out, and that's because when you talk about exactly, well, and this is what's really interesting, because I think most of these guys probably are very sociopathic. I know Jordan Peterson has done a lot of analysis of tyrants throughout history, and most of them share very, very sociopathic tendencies and behaviors, because I believe all of them were sociopaths. And one of the things that sociopaths do is they always think that everybody uses the same tactics that they do. So Stalin forced his way into power, and he was always thinking that somebody else was going to force their way into power behind him, was going to take him and stab him in the back and take him out so that they could actually attain power. We see this throughout history with tyrants, and a lot of times that's what happens, is they get taken out in some way. Little quick plug, because Mike was going to be on with us tonight, but he couldn't make it, the Mad Bomber, but he was actually with us in Georgia last week, and he mentioned a movie that is a comedy, but it's such a great picture of what happens when a dictator dies, and the vacuum that it creates, and that it's usually filled by people that are as bad or worse. And that is The Death of Stalin. It's a movie that was made, I think a couple of decades ago, early 2000s, with Steve Buscemi. It's a great movie. And it's quite funny at places, but it also actually shows a fairly accurate portrayal of the power grab that went on afterwards, and how they just basically turned on each other, because there's no patriotism when it comes to communism. It's all just a power grab. It's not like what we would think of as a patriotic system. It is literally the men in power just want more power. And so the next thing is this is from the Brookings Institute, and it's talking about really where these things begin to push. So 1929 to 1953 was really Stalin's rule. He died in 53. And harshness and repression, there were 20 million people incarcerated in the gulags. We'll get to the gulags in a little bit. And most of these camps closed after 1953. Some of them actually ran into the 1980s because you had these other communist leaders that just carried on and continued to try and grab power after Stalin. So actually, it wasn't until the Soviet Union fell in the late 1980s, 89, that you saw this power vacuum kind of go away. But there is still remnants of it in Russia to this day. So it's a very, very interesting, and you can see the geographic layout from 1923 to 1960, the forced labor camps. We talked about that in the last episode, that the beginnings of it were in those island regions under Lenin. And so we move on to really the NKVD and the Gulag system. S2, why don't you quickly talk about the NKVD, what your understanding of them historically is?
Well, they were brought about under Lenin, I believe, originally, and it basically was the form of their secret police, or in modern terms, a form of our FBI. They would come and take people out.
Yep.
And I'll go back to say that this is under the former administration here, where I can say that.
Right.
Number one, having these gulags near, they had so many of them out there in these work camps. They had so many of these near what we would call population centers, because it put them front and center in front of the citizens of Russia, because they wanted them to see, this is what will happen to you. And if this is what will happen to you if you say anything against the regime.
Yep.
And they kind of did the same thing, fast forwarding to our time. They kind of did the same thing with the FBI, where if you went out and posted a meme that said F Joe Biden or let's go Brandon, you had the FBI banging on your door the next day and hauling you away in chains. So it was kind of the same thing. And that's what the NKVD were. They were the older version of our modern day FBI back under Joe Biden.
Yep, 100%. And so this is a graph in this article. It's a great article talking about over time. So you see late 1920s, early 30s, you see this start to climb. So this dotted line is the amount of prisoners in the millions. So if you guys aren't familiar with these kind of graphs, over here is the amount of camps, and on this side is the amount of prisoners. So the green line shows camps by how many camps they had, and then you have the amount of millions over here that were incarcerated at any given time. So the camps, anywhere from, here you got about 50 all the way up to 150, all the way up to almost to 200 in the 1950s. And then you see this stark drop off as they started to close after Stalin died. But this is a representation of the political prisoners. And a lot of these were in very, very rough areas. I don't know if you guys don't know geographically, in the Siberia region of Russia, the bitter winters. So a lot of these prisoners were living in horrible conditions. Think like Nazi death camp conditions, work camps, but in horrible climates like Siberia and on the Black Sea, and all of these places that were really just horrible places to survive. And those that did survive brought back harrowing tales of the way that they were treated. The Gulag system, and really, the NKVD was the precursor to the KGB. Think German Gestapo, the secret police. the Stasis, all of those kind of people or organizations that their sole purpose was not to do anything but to terrorize their own people. They were an internal police force, and they were meant to seek out and find dissenters, yes, and subvert people. And Nikolai Yezhov was the bloody dwarf, and he orchestrated the purges that were carried out by the NKVD. And these were very, very heavily detailed communist crimes. So if we go to this next one, here is the history of the gulags. This is actually a really, really awesome website that I found in my research, and it shows it's actually an interactive map where you can actually click on a region and it will zoom in, and you can see all of the different gulag systems, all of the different where they were geographically in Russia. And it's actually a really, really cool website. And then it gives you a history. So if you guys want to dive even deeper in this, we have an hour show. We don't have a time to go through all of this in detail, but these are great websites to go find. And this is just gulag.online. And you can find a lot of this history. It even has a historical timeline that shows you where each one of these were, how they ramped up, and in the period of time, like here's 36 to 38, Stalin's Great Terror, and then World War II. And there was after World War II. So in World War II, there was actually kind of almost a reprieve. A lot of these prisoners were pulled out of these prisons and put on the front line in Russia, and basically were forced to fight. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Enemy at the Gates. It's a great scene that's a depiction of how the Russians fought in a lot of ways. They would pull these guys out, throw them onto a battlefield. They would give one a rifle and one an extra magazine or a clip of 5 rounds for a Mosin Nagant, and they would send them into machine gun fire. And the bad thing is like if you did not continue forth into certain death and you turned around and ran scared or stopped moving forward, your own Russian machine guns would mow you down. And there's a great scene in that movie that actually depicts this perfectly when a young Vasily Zaitsev gets off of the boat and is forced into the front line and survives that first battle, but only because he basically hides among the dead bodies of Russian soldiers until he can get free. So it's pretty insane, the tactics that the Russians use. But then after 1945, a fresh wave of arrests, and they pushed all of these minorities, including Russian Jews and Christians and Orthodox Christians, into these camps again as part of this insane, and as a part of this insane rounding up. And there was also some other things that happened, and I'll let you speak to some of this as well, S2, is that this is from The Sun, and this is an article talking about the cannibalism that went on in these camps because they were so starved and so overworked. So there was a harrowing story of Stalin's Cannibal Island, and this was where 6,000 prisoners who ate each other and hung human flesh from trees. This is quite a harrowing article to read, and this is the Nazino Island here, and it was off in a river, looks like the Ob River in Russia, and it was called the Island of Death. In 1933, some 6,700 prisoners were forcibly relocated to Nazino Island in Tomsk Oblast in Russia. Labeled socially harmful and declassed elements, people like hardened criminals, profiteers, beggars, prostitutes, and former priests were sent to frosty Siberia to work for Stalin's state. So this is also talking about some of the horrible things that human beings were forced into because they wanted to survive, and everybody just wanted to live. So there's a lot of stories like this throughout history where you turn to things that you never even thought were capable. S2, let's talk about just the horror of this Gulag system and how it's just a horrible mark in history.
So these political prisoners, and I'll call them political prisoners because that's what they were, they probably underwent the worst suffering, because on top of the hard labor conditions that they were forced to be under, and because of the despotism of the guards, they were terrorized even by criminal prisoners as well. And the historians estimate that a total number of Gulag prisoners at 20 million at one point in time, and about 2 million of them didn't survive their incarceration. And here's the thing: is that a lot of people think that this was just a Russian thing. There were a lot of people from other countries that were in these gulags as well. And they had Czechs in there, they had Poles, they had Hungarians, they had French people, they had Americans and others in these gulags as well. And
Yeah.
essentially they gave them just enough food to subsist, and putting them under the hard labor, they were expected to perform. And if they didn't perform, well, they got beat and abused and all these other things. Well, a lot of the times what ends up happening is these people don't get enough to eat, and one of their friends dies out there performing labor, either in an accident or just because they die of natural causes from being so weak that the other prisoners would take advantage of that, or they would be very opportunistic in that situation and eat their fellow prisoners.
Yeah, that is, I can't imagine that, but it's built in us as humans to try and survive, and we'll do horrible things. I mean, you talk about the people that survived some of the Nazi death camps and the things that they had to do, people that have survived communist China and got out, people that recently have gotten out of North Korea to actually tell stories of how horrible and the horrible things that they had to do. It's just it's a testament for how evil is so prevalent in the world today, and it's been prevalent throughout history. And these ideologies are just a harvesting ground for this stuff.
And listen to this. Just think of this. Hillary Clinton went on television and said that we need to send all of these Trump supporters to re-education camps. And I don't think people really understand how close we came to that reality. I mean, we are by and far not out of the woods with the situation yet, but I don't people understand the reality of how close we came to that. If the cackling hen had actually won.
Yep. It's and think of this also, like the re-education camps that Lenin had, and then that turns into the Gulag system. And there have been TV personalities in the last 5 years to a decade that have talked about putting conservatives and Christians into re-education camps, that they need to actually be put into these camps and dissenting and silencing dissenters. We have seen that recently on social media. The very reason, we are getting and growing a Substack really came to prominence because they were the one place where a lot of these people that had been silenced on then Jack Dorsey owned Twitter and basically X'd out of the conversation in the public square. This was where they went to publish articles that were countering the narratives on the viruses from China and the treatments that were being proposed. And they were countering those narratives. And thank God that there was a place that they were able to go and find footing and be able to find a way to get this truth out. But that spirit of communism, that spirit of oppression and silencing and doing all of these things is still alive today. And make no mistake, and I say this almost every episode, the reason why tyrants have not been able to fully take a hold in the United States is solely because of the Second Amendment. There is nothing else out there that has stopped them more than the Second Amendment, because they know if they start rolling over people, people are going to revolt. And you don't have enough people to go into places like Texas and North Carolina and all of these places, go try and take out Appalachian Americans, and they're going to hide in the hills, and they're going to shoot you dead. And that's the reality of this. The Second Amendment has been the biggest stopgap from keeping these tyrants from taking over. Let me go back and state something. It's not necessarily in the brief, but it's something I was thinking on when I was pushing this forward. We have actually had some very, very tyrannical presidents in this country. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is definitely a top 4 or 5 tyrannical leader. He was the one that pushed the National Firearms Act, and that was solely aimed at poor and minority Americans, to make the barrier of entry for them to be able to buy guns, military grade weapons. I firmly believe that we should have military grade weapons. And that was the sole reason that he did the National Firearms Act and pushed this. He was one of the main proponents of it, was so he could keep these weapons out of the hands of everyday Americans. And FDR was, he if you read about him, he was very, very friendly to socialism. He was very, very friendly to, actually really liked Hitler when he first came into power. Ironic, huh? Liked Mussolini, was a very, very big fan of how they were bringing their governments along. So we have had tyrants in the presidency, but our system of government has always been the checks and balances. So and having our Bill of Rights, we have been able to keep these people from taking full control. I'm going to let you speak for a minute as we move on to the show trials.
You kind of lost me there for a second. I was having some problems with my UPS.
Yeah. So the next part of this is the show trials. They were a mockery of justice, and this was something that Stalin started pushing forward in 1936. September 1936, Yezhov replaced Yagoda as the head of the NKVD. More than any other police chief, Yezhov was prepared to indulge Stalin's paranoid fantasies by fabricating evidence and counter-revolutionary conspiracies and spy rings everywhere. He had curried Stalin's favor by uncovering the Kremlin affair of 1935. For several years, Yezhov had promoted the theory that Trotsky's orders from above I'm not going to pronounce that word, Z and K, had been plotting to murder Stalin and other members of the party leadership, including Kirov, on this basis. Stalin reopened the Kirov investigation in August 36. I'm not going to read through all of this, but this was the first of several show trials. Their aim was to expose a coordinated ring of spies and terrorists organized by former oppositionists. So this is jailing and putting on trial your political opponents. Does that sound like something that has happened recently in this country, specifically at a high level in government? Do you guys remember the Mar-a-Lago raid?
Yep.
Think about that. Show trials, stuff that putting people on trial for things that were not even considered and nobody had ever been incarcerated for. I don't know. That's happened recently. Look, I mean, let's draw some parallels here. This is January 6th Let's talk about that. What happened? They jailed a bunch of people and refused due process for multiple years. Think about that. S2, what do you think about that? I mean, this is a communistic spirit that we've seen in our own country within the last 4 years.
Yeah. But
I
mean, like I said, we've seen people hauled away in the middle of the night. We've seen people killed in the middle of the night. We've seen people and their families being dragged out in the street, literally by gunpoint.
Yep.
So yeah, we've seen all of this. And I mean, the trials that they went through, there were three main trials actually. The trials that were primarily known as the Moscow trials, they were consisting of three major public trials. One was the trial of the 16 that was in August of 1936, the trial of the 17 in January of 1937, and the trial of the 21 in March of 1938. So primarily what they did was they targeted the old Bolsheviks, because obviously those were the ones that wanted to take over Stalin. The accusations that were put on them were largely fabricated. They were based on forced confessions and extracted through torture, threats, psychological coercion. And the trials aimed to scapegoat defendants for economic failures on the internal dissent. So the trials were heavily publicized. It was state-controlled media portraying them as evidence of a vast anti-Soviet conspiracy. They were staged to justify Stalin's purges and instill fear in the population. And the NKVD's role under Nikolai Yezhov played a very big role in orchestrating those trials, fabricating the evidence, and securing confessions. And it all goes back to the statement that says, "Show me the man and I'll find you the crime."
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Stalin was also famously quoted as saying, "I don't care who votes. I care who counts the votes." That sounds familiar.
And what a lot of people don't know is that the large majority of those defendants in those trials were executed. They weren't sent to the gulags. They were executed because Stalin saw them as a great threat to his regime.
Yep.
And
the next, go ahead.
You had some of them whose families were killed behind them, because just like the old Italian vendetta, if you kill me, you're going to have to deal with my son later.
Yep. Absolutely. So now we move to the next one. And this is the last real topic. And this is how we tie this whole thing together. I believe the ultimate goal, because this is always what they stamped out in the background. It wasn't always necessarily the primary, but a lot of this other political dissent was used to purge out the religious leaders and the clergy. And specifically in Russia, the Orthodox Church was one of the areas in the world where it was the strongest at the time in the early 20th century, was in Russia. It had grown out of Eastern Europe into Russia and had a very vibrant church system in that region. So Joseph Stalin, in the middle of his great purge, would then arrest, round up, and murder thousands upon thousands of clergies, of priests, and all of the leaders in those areas. From 1928 until World War II, when some restrictions were relaxed, the totalitarian dictator shuttered churches, synagogues, mosques, and ordered the killing and imprisonment of thousands of religious leaders in an effort to eliminate the concept of God. He saw this as one way of getting rid of the past that was holding people back and marching towards the future of science and progress. So says the historian Stephen Merritt Minor, author of Stalin's Holy War, Religion, Nationalism, and Alliance Politics. Like most of what Stalin did, he accelerated the violence of the Leninist period. So this was just a building, and I told you guys that last time, that this is really where the metal starts to meet the meat, for lack of a better term. So this was his moving towards that, and he had the Godless 5-year plan that was launched in 1928. Gave local cells of anti-religious organization, League of Militant Atheists, new tools to disestablish religion. Churches were closed and stripped of their property, as well as any education or welfare activities that were based in liturgy. So any kind of church, think soup kitchens and outreaches that give people practical things that may be less fortunate, and gives them some hope. Think of those being shuttered, and the leaders of those organizations being jailed, or in most cases actually shot. So this next article from The Guardian actually talks about, in Stalin's purges in 1936 and 37, tens of thousands of clergy were rounded up and shot. And it was illegal to teach religion in your own children from 1917 to the Perestroika period in the 1980s. The more religion persisted, the more the Soviets would seek new and inventive ways to eradicate it. Today, the Russian Orthodox churches are packed full. Once the grip of oppression has been released, the faithful return to churches in their millions. Well, let's talk about this for a little bit, because this is going to be tie into something that is not as well known. And S2, you did some work on this, and we'll get to that in a minute. But just an overview of Stalin's staunch anti-religious stance against the church and religion. Are you there? I think you're muted, bud.
Yeah, I'm here. There is some irony in this, in that where Stalin was born in Gori, Georgia, he was raised in a religious household, and he attended a Russian Orthodox seminary in Tiflis from 1894 to 1899. However, exposure to the revolutionary ideas, including Marxism, eventually led him to reject religion. And by his late teens, he openly identified as an atheist. He was viewing religion as incompatible with scientific materialism, or communism, as we could know it by other names. His atheism was in Marx's ideology, which, again, there's another piece of irony. And basically, that ideology viewed religion as an opiate of the masses. And it was a tool that was used by the ruling class to pacify and control the proletariat. And he saw atheism as essential to building a socialist society based on rationalism and class struggle. And you mentioned something about the Great Purge. So during the Great Purge, as you mentioned, religious figures were targeted, and alongside with their political rivals, and then thousands of priests, monks, and other God-believing people were arrested and executed and sent to labor camps, and they were accused of counter-revolutionary activities. And by about 1939, I think it was, about 500 of over the 50,000 pre-revolutionary churches remained open. So they went from 50,000 to 500. Now, something else around this too is that around the time of World War II, Russia was facing some obviously existential threats. And he relaxed some of the restrictions on the Russian Orthodox Church to boost the morale and the national unity. In 1943, he allowed the church to restore patriarchate, and that's basically the high church, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then, though they were still under strict state control, he was showing his willingness to use religion strategically. So he was deceiving while using the church as that excuse to do so.
Yep. So yeah, and so we're running up on time, but I don't want to leave this out because this is something that you added to me as like this is a very, very fascinating article about communism and Islamic states, and how while it's like this strange bedfellows thing, and this is from May 13th, 2020, this article. But and you can't find a lot of articles like this in the United States, but you can find them sometimes from foreign authors. And this is a very, very interesting article. I'm going to give you a few minutes to speak to this, and then we'll wrap up. Did I lose you? I don't know if you're cutting out or not.
No, I'm back. I was talking about something apparently they don't like me talking about, and they fiddling around with my internet connection. Never.
Anyways, do you want to? Yeah, just go ahead and speak to this real quick. And the Bolsheviks and the Islamic East, how that it appears that they welcomed left wing Muslims. This is a key thing. Bolsheviks welcomed left-wing Muslims into the party. Even at the time, 15% of the Soviet Communist Party membership were Muslim. In Central Asia, the East is as much as 70%.
As I'm sure we have a lot of really smart people in our audience, and I'm sure everybody understands that how closely the ideology of Islam matches up with communism. I mean, basically, it's total control. They are allowed to do things that normally their religion doesn't allow. So as long as they can use that to deceive the infidel, anything to achieve their goal, and that is basically the tenet of communism is by any means necessary.
Yep, 100%. And so I think that's really interesting, considering some of the narratives that come out about the Soviet Communist Party and the Bolsheviks and all that stuff, that Muslims were actually a pretty integral part of that. 15% is not a small percentage. And it's very, very, it's very interesting. And this is something I'm going to do a little bit more research on as we move into maybe some of our other topics that are going to be adjacent to this series in the future, because this is a very interesting thing. And thank you for sharing that. It's something that we have to realize, that tyranny and authoritarianism is really, it's just two sides of the same coin. As S2 said earlier, socialism, communism, even fascism, National Socialism share a lot of the same kinds of ideologies. And when you started looking at religious ideologies, and I don't necessarily even classify Islam as a religion, it's more of a cult, but every one of these ideologies has a god, and they're all fake gods. They're all not real. And we have to learn to identify these characteristics. And I think it's more of a set of characteristics than it is even a religion or ideology, or a cultish type thing. Is if somebody is trying to take away your personal freedoms in the name of collectivism or communal living, that is the first sign. And it may sound good on the outside. It may sound good to your ears to say, oh yeah, everybody's going to have exactly what they need and nobody's going to suffer. We're not going to have different classes, or everybody's going to just be the same. And what communism ignores is the fact that there is a thing called human nature. There is a thing called sinful nature, and that will always control people that get in power. And they're going to eventually turn to, if they cannot convince you by the words that they say, they're going to force you by the acts of their hands. And they're going to kill, they're going to steal, and they're going to destroy. There is another historical character that is the characteristic of, and that is Satan. It says in the Bible that he is seeking like a roaring lion what he may devour, and he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. So anytime that an ideology, yes.
Hang on a second. If you lose me, it's because my laptop crapped out.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, if I lose you, then no worries. We're about to close out anyway. So with all that being said, what are we looking for? Why are we focusing so hard on this? Is because throughout history that communism has shown to be the vehicle for tyranny, the vehicle for death, destruction, and theft. And we have to stand against those things. So we don't trust mainstream narratives. We are going to get into the current day after a few more episodes of this. And we're going to show you guys the parallels of Stalin, Mao, Lenin, Marx throughout, and all of the acts that were created and done throughout history, and how they actually parallel what is going on with some of the political ideologies that are coming out of our colleges and our schools now. So how do we prepare for this? How do we prepare for governments that commits overreaches like Stalin? We've already drawn some parallels of some of the more recent things that have happened in our country. First, focus on self-reliance. Make sure we have good food stockpiles and water and ammo, and build communities. Educate people on history. History is the great barometer that if we forget it, we're going to repeat it. And it sounds cliche, but it's absolutely true because we've seen it repeated. This ideology has repeated itself, even though it has failed. And anybody says that it just hasn't been tried in the correct way is either dumb or they're nefarious. So don't trust mainstream narratives. Check everything. Finally, ground yourself in faith. Ground yourself in the Word of God. The Bible says, "Your word have I hidden in my heart that I might not sin against you." And that also, when we are in tune with the real ideology that works, biblical ideology, we can see the false. It's like I heard a story about how they train bank tellers to catch counterfeit bills. They don't hand them a bunch of different counterfeit bills. They hand them real money. And if you know real money and you know how it feels and how it feels against your fingers, then you can spot the fake. So we have to know our own ideology, know our own history. And when it comes to our country, we need to know the Constitution. And we need to know why and how our government works, how it's supposed to work, so that we are not blinded by the narratives coming out of the nefarious news media. So if you guys have questions or comments, make sure and hit us up on our Substack. That's Survival Dispatch News .substack.com. You can also hit us up on X, all of our social medias that we're on and active on. Just make sure that you guys jump on the bandwagon there. And this is what's the biggest threat to big tech is liberty and our ability to speak out against it. And we are able to do that on our Substack. If you guys want to support us, you can go over there and become a paid Guardian member. And you get a lot of things, as I mentioned before, with that. So what we need to do now is we need to, as I said, remember history. Tyranny thrives on lies and control, and is no match for the truth, faith, and resilience. Protect your family, question authority, and hold fast to the cross. History isn't just the past. It's a playbook for what is to come, and we need to be vigilant. We want to hear from you guys, so share your thoughts and comments in Substack and Patreon and the Signal chat if you are a Guardian. So I would highly encourage you guys to do that. We'll keep dispatching truth to Americans who want to save our republic and Christian culture. Use the promo SDG 2025 for a free 1-week subscription to our Substack. You guys can do that after this stream is concluded. And you also get, when you subscribe, you get the Sit Rep Daily, the Signal Chat, 37 e-mags on survival, about $370 worth of free items, as well as their survival guide for any SHTF scenario. Huge shout out to all of our members and all of our supporters, whether free or paid. We could not do this without you guys. And next week, we are going to be diving into the Mao regime, which paralleled for a few years the Stalin regime just over in China. We're going to give you guys a history of how Mao came to power after World War II and why we need to be aware, and how the Maoist regime has actually continued on to this day. President Xi is just another iteration of communistic ideology, just a little bit more sophisticated. So thank you guys all. We will be back here tomorrow with another episode, and I hope you guys will join us then. And until then, I'm going to pray us out, and then we are going to sign out. Heavenly Father, thank you very much for giving us this platform, for allowing us to speak truth and to speak the truth of history and learn from that. History and legacy are two of the biggest things that we can learn about to talk and move forward into the future. Lord, I pray that you give each one of us a wisdom that is beyond our understanding and a discernment for these false and fake ideologies that are rooted in satanic principles and ideologies. Lord, I pray that you give us each safety and prosperity in our lives and keep us safe until we meet again. In Jesus' name, amen. S2, do you have anything to add to what I said before we sign off?
Nope, you already said the prayer. You're done.
Until next time, you guys stay on the wall, keep watch, be prepared, and we will survive anything that the enemy has to throw at us. God bless America.
Hoorah.
A group of protesters, including 2 members of Congress, broke into the ICE detention facility.
Whoa,